Okay, I have started the recording, so we'll go ahead and get busy here. As usual, the first thing on the agenda is news from LibLime, and today I don't really have much news from LibLime. There's at least one thing that I want to share with you, but it's a new feature that is going to be probably pretty definite actually. LibLime is going to be working on adding an ERM to the software, and what the plan is at this point in time is it would be a staged project. We've talked about Coral before in different conversations, and that's the software that they're going to use as a basis. There is a federal agency that is really interested in this, and I know several of you have also been interested in an ERM, but you didn't necessarily want to buy the one that Ex Libris has, and I can't remember its name. Let's see. No, I am not even going to try. And there are some others that are out there that I know that some places have implemented and used. The software, as I said, is Coral, and that has been it's been used by several different places. In the application of the Coral software, one of the things that John wants to be able to do is to populate it from the data that Waldo already has about your online subscriptions, so that all of that information that you would have to key manually, you don't have to worry about keying in manually because it would be transferred into the system. So it would be a matter of managing the ongoing work that would be needed to be done, as well as probably implementing new features that were available in the Coral software. As more information is available about that, and as Patrick finds out more from the federal agency, I'll bring this up again, so just to keep you informed about what's happening. I don't know about the timing. When we talked about the timing of this project, Patrick didn't have a good idea about it, and he said that it could be really fast or it could be really slow. So right now it's just that they are investigating adding an ERM into the software. That's about all that I was able to get out of our call this week. Let me go to the second item on the agenda and ask if any of you have anything you would like to bring up, any experiences, problems, bugs, either in the sandbox or in production.
Hi, Becky, this is Ben.
Hey, Ben.
So we are trying to get the patron anonymization thing squared away, and I have found out that it's not really tested. That we're going to be the first ones to really test not just the automated process to clear completed circulation transactions, but also the mechanism that displays checkout history to people in the case that they are retaining checkout information for a certain amount of time. So it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. And also it involves like modifying patron roles to determine which class of patrons are going to see what as far as circulation is concerned. But I will try to keep you posted, and if anybody has any input on this, if you're thinking about clearing circulation information, even once or twice a year, which I know some institutions do, please let me know.
Okay. I don't see Ann on the call right now, but I know that St. John's University did go through a patron purge earlier during the summer. And one of the net results is that my account on both production and sandbox disappeared. So just a word of caution to anyone considering that is that if I get locked out of your system, it's hard for me to look at things and try to figure out what happens. It was no big deal. I mean, Anne was able to add in my patron record again, but it's just something you have to think about. Right now, I think in most of the different systems out there that I'm identified as staff or administration. So when you think about the rules that you're going to be using to purge your patrons, keep that in mind. You also don't want to purge out accounts of faculty members who are on sabbatical or who may not be teaching for one semester. So especially if you don't have that data sent to you via your registrar.
Yeah, you raise a good point. It used to be, until we upgraded to Bibliovation, it used to be that both of those things, clearing completed circulation transactions and clearing out inactive patrons, were done at the same step. And I am so glad that I made it through 11 years without accidentally wiping out most of our patron set. But now it seems to be split out, and I'm really kind of wondering how much overlap there's going to be between the process that does the automatic anonymization of transactions and the process that clears out inactive patrons. I think they're completely separate now, but I definitely need to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think they are, but I haven't tested that, so I wouldn't guarantee it one way or another. One thing that you might want to do, Ben, before you start testing and running things in the sandbox is to let LibLime know that what you're doing and ask them if you by some chance happen to end up deleting more patrons or not getting the patron history, if they could restore those files for you as while you're doing your testing. Because if you lose all your patrons, it's not going to be helpful for trying to figure out what to do in production.
That's a good idea, thank you. And of course, all their circ information as well. Oh God, what a nightmare this could be.
Right, right. Okay, any other issues that have come up? I flipped over here just a little bit ago, and there have been a few questions that have been asked about some cron jobs and being unable to delete records, etc. Let's see, Janelle, did you get an answer that helped you? Let's see. Okay, looks like I need to look into that one a little bit for you. But there haven't been as many added on a daily basis. And I have been watching to make sure that LibLime is actually paying attention to things. And I do see that they update it on a fairly regular basis. So I'm not going to focus on any of the problems that are out there right now. What I wanted to do instead this time is to review the lost item handling in Bibliovation 6.0. As you have probably all been you probably all noticed that there are differences in the way that it works now. So I thought what I would do is just sort of step through the pieces of the setup information, the policies, and then get into how this new processing works. And then also talk about the old process or the old statuses and what happened to those and how you can find them and correct them if you need to update their statuses for any reason. So let's go ahead and get started by looking. Let me see, where did I put it? I found sometimes that Firefox does weird things and opens up a new browser instead of just opening a new window. I'm going to start by going over into administration, and I'm going to first search for the long overdue settings. And if you remember way back when you were first starting to set up the system, this was one of the options that you were instructed about, that you knew had to be set up. And it is the way that you tell the system how long an item can be overdue before it's automatically identified as whatever status it is that you wanted to have it identified as. And in this particular system preference, there have been changes made that you need to be aware of. And if you haven't looked at this, I don't blame you, because from the release notes, even I didn't know that this was actually here until I started looking into it. But you will do two things in this long overdue settings system preference now. One, you will identify the amount, the number of days from the time an item goes overdue until the system automatically marks it as long overdue. And it will also identify how long from the time the item is checked out until the time that you want to declare it as lost. Okay, in order to do that, if you read through the explanation here, you can choose to do one or both of them, or neither of them. If you do neither of them, none of this is going to make any difference to you. But I would suggest that you probably do want to do something, because these different statuses trigger notices that get sent to the patron. So for the long overdue, what I had set here before, and I remember doing this, I had it set to 30 days, I think it was. And during the migration, during the upgrade, that was overlaid with the new values that go into this field. What you will put in here is first long overdue, followed by a colon, followed by the number of days that you want the system to count between the time an item is checked out until the time that it's considered long overdue. Okay, and if you also want to identify your loss parameter at the same time, you can do a comma and then put in the word lost, a colon, and the number of days. And I'll follow the example here. I'll put 45. The statuses that are available for the lost item handling right now are programmed into the software and are used by different pieces, by different cron jobs that run in order to automatically change the status from one value to another. Okay, so the long overdue one you're familiar with because we've had that all along. The lost one has never been, well, the lost one has been one of the options, but, and this is going back a long time in history, if you remember when we first started using Koha, the lost authorized value had 4 settings that were pretty standard. There was the software applied, system applied, library applied, and then there was like a missing and a not on shelf or whatever. And some libraries kept all of them, some added more, some deleted some of them. And the only processing at that time was the capability to run the cron job that would look for long overdue and move the long overdue status in the item record from checked out to either lost or overdue, depending on what value you had in the 1 and 2 positions in the authorized values. Okay, so that is totally different now. And in order to use the capabilities of the system, the first step is to look at your long overdue settings. Okay, after you have your long overdue and or your lost setting set, be sure to save it before you go on. And then there are a few other things that you need to be aware of. There are several system preferences that have the word lost in them sometime. And these are values that you've set a long time ago. You may not have looked at these in a long time or not, but I would recommend that you look at these again to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. The apply fine when lost item charge is refunded. You have either the date lost or the date found. You can see that right now I have it set to date lost. So that will help to calculate the fine. So it'll look at the date that you declared the item lost versus the date that the item was found. It helps to have that one identified. Hide lost items, that's neither here nor there. And I'm not always sure that this one works. Even though I have it turned on, I see lost items showing up in OPAC displays all the time. So my guess is that probably isn't working quite right. The max loss surcharge per day, this is if a person has 20 books that are overdue and there is a loss surcharge, you can set a maximum that they get charged for any one day. And when it gets to this value, that's all that will be charged anymore. The refund lost returned amount and the refund returned lost item and the refund surcharge when lost item charge refunded are all they sort of interplay together. The refund lost returned amount in this case is marked off, so that means that in my library, I'm not going to be forgiving if somebody returns a lost item. I will let them have their the returned lost item fee, the charge that was there, the $10 or $15 that's in the policy. But if they lost it and I had to go to extra work for them to bring it back, they're not going to get the cost of the book back. Okay, then there is also the refund surcharge when lost item charge refunded. And this is basically, as I read it, the same as having both of these options turned on. Okay, so you want to look at those and make sure that it's doing what you state your policy is to your patrons. And if it doesn't look like it's doing something right, play with it first in the sandbox. And when you see that it's working the way you want it to, then make the changes in production. Don't do them simultaneously, or you may end up with a situation that you don't really care about. Then there's another set of things that you need to look at. You need to look at your item types and see if you have a replacement price within these fields. You don't have to have them in here. What Fall Bibliovation is going to do is first going to look in the item record to see if there is a price in the item record. If there is a replacement price or even the list price, it will pick those up and use them when it charges or when it calculates what the fee is going to be to the patron. You can identify the replacement price either as zeros. In other words, you're not going to have that set at an item type stage, or you can put in a dollar amount that will be used if there is no price in the item records. So this is where you have to think a little bit about, you know, if you have a paperback leisure reading collection and you have them all in the same item type, you might not want to have a $50 automatic replacement fee if there's no price in the item. You might get a lot of arguments from your patrons. So look at it and you know, keep in mind how you have your different item types set up, and then determine. I'm just going to show you the first page here because that's really all that you need to know about in this particular place. You can set the replacement price. Then in our circulation and fine rules, and let me go down, oops. Actually, I want to go to the policies, not the rules. Okay, and in our policies, remember that when we look at our overdue fines, one of the options here is a replacement surcharge. So by policy for your circulation interactions, you can identify a replacement surcharge in this field. Okay, that's one way to do it, so that whatever the policy is that you're working with, you can choose your replacement surcharge by that policy. So you can see that some of the different dollar amounts that are in the replacement fees are equipment, a $2 replacement fee. I would suggest that that's in there just for show. That is probably not what a policy would look like if I had this in a real library. Equipment is typically more expensive to replace than $2, so I might actually have a much higher number in there normally. Okay, so this is a way that you can control what the replacement surcharge is going to be within the policies. Okay, you've got the item types where you can identify a replacement surcharge. You have the policy where you can do the fee, and there is one other place to look, and that's in your library and or branches codes. Let me show you this one. And one of the options here, oh no, I decided there was nothing here that we needed to look at. If you use the debt collection agency that South Central uses, there is a whole another section that can be added in here, but that's something that is set up at a higher level than what we can work with it here. So I won't go into that one. I'm not going to talk about any of the threshold rules or the recall rules today. Just going to next go into sorry, I'm getting confused easily here. So we've gone through 1A and B. So we've got this lost overdue policies. In the user manual, there is a section that's called lost item handling. It isn't very long, so it doesn't take very long to read through it. But you need to understand how it's going to work and then some other considerations with it. Is this making sense to everybody so far?
Just to verify, you're saying that it's no longer setting our items to lost unless we have something in that new long overdue settings syspref.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. So just for the benefit of this, if you get nothing else out of it, then this is a good thing. I'm going to go back into the software for a minute because this will be easier to show. If you look at your authorized values, if you remember in your authorized values, there's all different kinds of things that are in here. And when you just look at the list, you'll see that there is a lost set in here and also lost-old. The lost-old is what you would have seen back in Koha 4.0 or whatever. This is how it would have been set up. A 0 with no description would mean that the item is not lost. And then we have our value of 1, which means system applied, 2, library applied, and then here's some of these extra ones that really never, that you could apply them and you could search for them and do reports based on those, but they really didn't do any automatic processing from one to another. Also, when we first started using this system, the way the cron job was set up is that it had the system applied and the library applied mixed up. And when it was changing it to library applied, it was breaking the link between the patron and the item, which really you didn't want to happen unless you moved the item to lost. And the system applied one is the one that did that. And some libraries had them switched. They had 1 as library applied and 2 as system applied. And they did that because they didn't want the link broken between the patron and the item. Otherwise, if you use the system applied, it was always going to break the link, and we didn't want that. So when the system applied it, we wanted the link to stay, and by default, it would remove it. So the only way we could figure out to make that work the way you wanted it was to change those around. And basically all we did is change the description. We didn't change the way that the software acted. We just, but we did what we could at the time. Okay, so this is lost old. All of the records that you had in your items file retained whatever value you had in them when you went through the migration to Bibliovation 6.0. The only thing that happened is that that happened with this is that instead of using these particular values now to apply to your lost statuses, you end up using the ones that are under lost. And under lost, we still have our available, basically, option at the beginning. And the way that this is now set up is reflective of how the cron job is set up. So we first would have our long overdue option that would be identified in the cron job, followed by the lost item. So every night when this runs, it runs through all the overdue items to see if they meet the criteria to be marked long overdue. And also at the same, well, in another statement, they also have this program looking for those items that should be marked as lost. Okay. The description in the documentation tells us how to do that. Let's see. When an item is marked lost, now if an item is marked lost, it's removed from the list of the checkouts. It is moved to the Lost Items tab, and the Lost Items tab will keep track of that. but at that point there will not be fines that are accruing. They won't, any holds that were associated with it will either be transferred to a different copy or will be canceled, and the people who have the holds will get notices that tell them that. Okay, at this point, the claims returned option, the value that's there, now will actually do something. If you change a lost item to claims return status, it's going to refund, it's going to remove I'm sorry, at this point the patron hasn't paid. It's going to change the fine value. It's going to take away the lost item fee and the surcharge if you use it, and that will be gone from the patron's account. If the item is checked in and it has a claims return status, then the patron will be charged just the maximum overdue fine. They won't be billed for the purchase price of the copy. Okay, and I thought that for this, it'd probably be easier to show some of those options. So let me come back over here and okay, so right now Emma has several overdue books, and because I didn't have my system preference set up, none of those ended up moving from the overdue status to long overdue or even to the lost status. So I can use any of these at this point in time. I'll use this last one. I can go into the status field of this particular record now, and when I go down here to my lost line, this is going to change the lost authorized value, not the lost old. So if I say that this is now lost, it's going to say that the patron is charged for the item, continue. If you say yes, it will charge the patron. And if you say no, it won't change it for you. Okay, so now this is lost. And let me go back to the patron again. And you'll see that the Asperger's syndrome, autism, and obsessive behavior now has a fee that's associated with it. Okay. So that took place right away. And if we then look at our lost items tab, that item is also going to show up here. You'll notice now that it's shown up here, we have another button that we can click on. If the patron who borrowed this comes to you and says, I know I returned this, I put it in the book drop, you may have a policy where video recordings should never be put in the book drop, but if they say you put them in the book drop, and if you tend to believe the patrons at that point, you can change this lost status to a claimed return status, and the dollar amount still stays here, but whenever you look at this again, you're going to see that the patron claimed that it was returned. If that item is found somewhere in the library and due to your checking in items that are found left on tables or out of place in the shelving, if it's checked in, these statuses will go away, and the patron will be charged the maximum overdue fine. Okay. The other, sorry, you think I get used to this, but I never do. The other thing that happens is that when that item is returned, it triggers notices. So a patron will get a notice saying that the item was returned, but they still owe a fine. The system will also, on the lost tab, as long as you leave those items on the lost tab, it will give you all the history right here. So you can see it was $65, 11/4/2014. There was a payment made, and if that actually balanced out, in other words, what they paid matched what they were charged, it'll say settled. If you didn't want that on their lost tab anymore, you could click on this X and it would go away. So right now we're still on our lost items. We know that this item was claimed returned, and instead of checking it in, I'm just going to show you that by clicking on the X, that will take this item off the lost tab. So all we have left is here. So part of the reasoning behind this is that anything that a patron lost can be tracked on this lost tab. And in the version before Bibliovation 6.0, there was never any real option that was given to you to take something off the lost items list other than manually going in and removing it. In this case, you can now determine, since you have more information here, you can determine whether or not you want to take the items off the lost list. And if you do, you can do it very easily. If you want to keep track of a person's accounting, you know, if it's someone who loses items often, you may want to keep track of those and leave them on this lost page. However, if you have the policy, if the item is returned and if the account is settled, you just want to get rid of them off of their lost page, you can do that now pretty easily. Okay, so when the cron job runs, let's see, I think I've covered everything that's down in here. The cron job is set up to run automatically, but I wanted to show you. Let me in the Super Librarian Manual, there is a list of the standard cron jobs that are available here. And you'll notice that there is the build, holds, queue, the advanced notices. If you are not getting any notices for any of these specific options for circulation, you probably will want to enter a support center ticket into telling them that you want to have a specific cron job run. Now, the overdue notices one I know gets generated every day. That's not a problem at all. The overdue, long overdue gets generated every day as well, but you also need to let them know, you need to set your system preference with your overdue, your long overdue, and your lost in order to get both pieces of that to work on an automatic basis. And you probably would, you know, there are two ways to do it. You can set the overdue notice, or you can enter a support center ticket telling them what you want for your value for the long overdue and the value you want for lost. I think it's easier just to do it in your system preference. So if you make changes, you don't have to remember to tell LibLime that they need to make changes in the way that that runs. So once you make those changes, they should go into effect immediately. The one thing that will not happen is it will not be retroactive. So if there was something that was marked lost that never got a notice that was generated, it won't generate it. Hold it, yes, it will generate it if it is within that time period. But if it's at the point, if it was something, okay, this is what I'm trying to say. If a status existed before you migrated from the old system to Bibliovation 6.0, this cron job will pick up only those things that have changed since Bibliovation 6.0 went live in your library. Okay, have I confused everyone, or does this help clear at least that much of it up so far? Okay, let me go a little bit into the old lost authorized values. I ran a couple of reports so that I could show you how these appear in the system. For the authorized values, they're here in whatever order they are. And what I did is I highlighted the lost old with the values. So there are some that are intermittently throughout the software. The new lost values are down here. Now this lost old and this lost, that's the overall category. And then the values that are the lines that are below those are the ones that are currently valid. So right now, as you know, there's lost, long overdue, missing, and trace in our lost. In our lost old, we have many more of those, okay? And in order to figure out if you need to do anything with them, I think the only way that you can get your that information is by doing some reports. So I set up I did a couple of reports, and I wanted to show you the difference between them. Let me go here to reports. And for your circulation people, you know that there is this items lost. And you can run this items lost anytime that you want to. You can choose a variety of ways to order the report itself. The one thing you need to be aware of is when you choose one of these options and it arranges it by these codes, what you're going to see is the same display. And what I mean by that is when it comes up, it's always going to be title, author, lost code, barcode, date last seen. Those columns are always going to be the same. So if you sort by the lost code, for example, that may be in an order, but everything else is going to appear to be just sort of random. The one thing that I discovered with this is when I ran this, it found 1,746 records that are lost. What I discovered is that by scrolling through this all the way to the bottom, and I may not go all there, I didn't have any lost codes in any of the records. Okay, what that tells me is that the record or the SQL behind this lost code is looking for both the lost authorized value and the lost old authorized values. Okay, because that's what I was asking it for. But it's not telling me what the actual value is. So I would have to look at every one of these item records to determine if I wanted to change the status in some way or not. So I did another lost items. So I did, let's see. So there is an SQL report that is in at least in the Waldo, and I think it's in probably everybody's sandboxes. And this one, when I ran it, it came back and told me that I had, I think it was 932 lost items, which is a little bit different than 1,700 and something. So this tells me that this SQL report that I ran to get this isn't looking for both the lost code and the lost old. Okay, so this is, and based on the dates here, I think it's just pulling up anything that's marked lost. But what this tells me is that lost items in our browser is probably a better one to work with. And the one thing that I have noticed about this, let me check at the top to make sure I'm not saying something wrong. Is that there's no way to export it. You can do a screen print, you can print the screen, but that's going to depend upon, you know, how fast your printer can absorb the data that's being streamed out. If you have a dot matrix printer still that you print on, you probably will miss several lines of this report. So I ran another report where I looked for item records that use the old authorized values. You see I titled this items with lost old authorized values. And the only two values that I found that were used in the Waldo sandbox were lost and missing. And in this particular report, I wind up with the same amount of records that I have on my items lost report that only prints to the browser. So what I thought might be useful, and I think that probably in your real life situations, you'd want more than the barcode, the call number, and the value that's in the item record. If you want to try and get any of the items that are currently marked lost into that processing, or those that are marked missing into that general processing, you would have to go in and do some maintenance on these and change the statuses. Let me go back to and for the SQL report that I did for this one, I basically just look for anything in the items file. If you wanted to have the author and the title and other bibliographic information display as well, like it does on the lost items report that goes to the browser, you can add those things in. It gets to be a little bit longer SQL statement, but that actually does work. But this is how I got those particular records, and you can go in and you can copy this and modify it and use it to find your records. Okay, and I've already talked about the cron job, so I just sort of wanted to do that. Now, I don't know how often you look through your lost items, but I am aware that there are some libraries that do look at the lost items after a certain amount of time and decide to either replace the items that were lost or to just delete the item record. So this is a way that you can use reports in order to help do some of that maintenance. Okay, does this help? Are there any questions? Okay, let me end with, you don't have to do anything with those old authorized values, but those records will just stay around. And if you do want to clean up the old items, you certainly can use any of the reports that you would like to use and find which ones they are. Okay, the last thing is the enhancement list ideas. I haven't really sent any of these to LibLime yet at this point, other than the patron load enhancement. Anne, have you had a chance to do any more on that? Okay, I think Anne just sort of signed off.
Hey, Becky.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the routing status, our serials folks are pleased with the changes that they've made to serials and are able to edit the volume and number such that they can include the routing status in there.
Okay.
If you take a look at that record that I sent, you can see what that looks like in the subscriptions tab. So I don't think, unless somebody really is displeased with that solution, I don't think that enhancement needs to be pursued.
Okay. Okay, I'll take it off, and if anybody wants it back, all they have to do is say put it back, and I'll do that. Okay, that's all that I have today. We'll meet again on October 24th. We'll go back to our Thursdays, our regular days. And I hope that tomorrow, after I go for my eye exam, I can see within a couple of hours again. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.